Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Military Forces Unleashed. Today we're diving deep into one of the most unique and misunderstood military forces in the world, Japan's Self-Defense Forces, or JSDF, a military force that's technically not a military, thanks to Japan's pacifist constitution. But don't let that fool you. These guys are packing some serious high-tech hardware, balancing on the fine line between defense and, well, something a little more complicated. Let's break down what makes the JSDF so different, and why they're quietly becoming one of the most capable forces in the world. When people think about Japan's military, they often imagine samurai warriors or World War II-era conflict. But the modern Japan Self-Defense Forces, JSDF, is a far cry from the Imperial Army. Since its establishment in 1954, the JSDF has operated under a unique and strict pacifist framework, which is a result of the post-World War II Constitution drafted under the watchful eye of the United States. But don't be fooled. The JSDF is no lightweight in the world of defense. With an annual budget of approximately $50 billion, Japan maintains one of the most advanced and capable military forces in the world, even though they're not technically called a military. Unlike most nations that maintain a standing military capable of offensive operations, the JSDF exists purely for defense. Japan's constitution, particularly Article 9, explicitly renounces war and prohibits the country from maintaining offensive military capabilities. This means that, in theory, Japan has no need for aircraft carriers, ballistic missiles, or long-range bombers. But in practice, the JSDF has found ways to skirt around these restrictions without breaking them. For instance, Japan's fleet of helicopter destroyers, like the Izumo class, looks an awful lot like aircraft carriers, but are labeled differently to comply with constitutional limitations. Japan has long been recognized as a technological powerhouse, and this expertise is reflected in the JSDF's equipment. The nation's defense industry is responsible for producing some of the most advanced weaponry and systems on the planet. Take the Mitsubishi F-2 fighter jet, for instance. It's essentially a souped-up version of the American F-16, but with more sophisticated avionics and radar systems. Japan also boasts one of the most advanced submarine fleets in the world. The Soryu-class diesel-electric submarines are particularly noteworthy. They're stealthy, long-ranged, and can stay submerged for extended periods thanks to air-independent propulsion. Yet, despite all this, Japan's military tech also faces some real challenges. The JSDF's reliance on cutting-edge technology comes at a cost. Literally, maintaining a military that's more reliant on high-tech gear than sheer numbers means that Japan constantly struggles with budget constraints. Sure, they have high-end fighters and advanced submarines, but they don't have as many of them as they'd like. While the United States can afford to produce hundreds of F-35s, Japan is limited in how many it can acquire, and maintaining them costs a fortune. The JSDF's Air Force might have world-class capabilities, but with only about 150 fighter jets in active service, it's a small force compared to regional adversaries like China or even North Korea, which focuses on mass over quality. Japan's location isn't exactly peaceful. To the north, they've got Russia, with whom they've never officially signed a peace treaty after World War II. To the west, China looms larger every year, with its growing military might and aggressive posture in the East China Sea. And then there's North Korea, constantly launching missiles into the sea, sending waves of anxiety across the region. Despite its pacifist constitution, Japan is surrounded by hostile neighbors, making the JSDF's job more complicated. It's one thing to have a top-tier defense force, it's another to operate under self-imposed restrictions while neighbors test their patience. And let's not even get started on the Senkaku Islands dispute with China, which could be a flashpoint at any time. Japan's security strategy has long relied on its partnership with the United States, and this relationship is critical to understanding the JSDF's role. Under the US-Japan Security Treaty, America is obligated to defend Japan in the event of an attack. The presence of around 50,000 U.S. troops stationed across Japanese bases acts as a deterrent to potential aggressors. But this arrangement isn't without its downsides. Many Japanese citizens are unhappy about the large U.S. military presence, particularly in Okinawa, where tensions sometimes flare between locals and American servicemen. Moreover, Japan's reliance on U.S. forces has often sparked debate over whether the country should move toward a more independent defense posture, especially as the U.S. shifts its focus to other global priorities. While most militaries prepare for war, the JSDF spends a significant amount of its time dealing with natural disasters. Given Japan's vulnerability to earthquakes, tsunamis, and typhoons, the JSDF is often called upon to provide disaster relief and humanitarian aid. In fact, some of the JSDF's most significant mobilizations in recent years haven't been for military operations, but for domestic disaster responses. During the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, the JSDF played a critical role in search and rescue operations, evacuating civilians and providing medical aid. This dual role as both a military force and a disaster response unit sets the JSDF apart from other militaries and has earned them a lot of goodwill domestically. However, this focus on disaster relief means that resources are often stretched thin. The JSDF is at a crossroads. On one hand, Japan is firmly committed to its pacifist constitution, with the majority of the population still supporting Article 9. On the other hand, regional threats are growing, and the United States may not always be around to lend a hand. In response, the Japanese government has begun inching toward a more robust military posture. In recent years, there's been talk of constitutional revisions, allowing Japan to possess more offensive capabilities and reducing its reliance on the United States. But these moves come with political risks, both domestically and internationally. For now, Japan continues to walk a fine line between tradition and the demands of an increasingly unstable world. At the end of the day, the JSDF represents a unique military force in a unique situation. They're highly capable, but constrained by legal and political limits. They're surrounded by potential threats, but must act within a pacifist framework. And while they've proven themselves time and time again, whether it's in disaster relief or in complex defense operations, there's always a question of what happens if they're pushed too far. The world watches as Japan balances on this knife's edge, waiting to see what happens next in the ongoing saga of a nation that, for all intents and purposes, isn't supposed to have a military at all. And that's the JSDF for you folks. A force built on defense, but constantly walking the razor's edge of international politics and regional threats. From high-tech submarines to disaster relief, they've got their hands full in more ways than one. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Japan's stealthy military force, don't forget to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most fascinating military forces. Until next time, stay tuned, stay sharp, and keep those forces unleashed.